Thank you again to everyone who is continuing to join us. We'll give it about 30 more seconds here, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Bueno, buenas tardes y muchas gracias por estar aquí en este evento, que es una colaboración entre el Departamento de Ciencia Política del ITAM y Convergence Lab de Arizona State University. Mi nombre es Mia Armstrong y soy la coordinadora de Convergence Lab, que es una serie de eventos que ASU organiza en México, que explora los retos y las oportunidades que comparten nuestros dos países. Hoy vamos a estar hablando en inglés, pero si prefieren escuchar la conversación en español, hay una opción para interpretación simultánea en la parte inferior de sus pantallas. So hello and welcome to anyone who may have missed that. Thank you for joining us in today's event, which is Global Challenges, North American Security. It's an event brought to you by the Department of Political Science at the Instituto Tecnológico Autónomo de México and Convergence Lab at Arizona State University. My name is Mia Armstrong, and I'm the coordinator of Convergence Lab, which is an event series that explores the challenges and opportunities shared by Mexico and the United States, with the goal of creating a better future in our region. Before we dive into our panel discussion today, we are incredibly lucky to be joined by ASU Provost and Executive Vice President Nancy Gonzalez, as well as ITAM Rector Arturo Fernandez Perez and ITAM Provost Alejandro Hernandez. Provost Gonzalez and Rector Fernandez are going to be signing today a memorandum of understanding between ASU and the ITAM, in which both institutions commit to expanding collaboration by increasing the opportunities for the exchange of students, faculty, and researchers between our two universities, exploring models of collaborative educational programs, and jointly carrying out professional and academic events like this one, among other mutually beneficial collaborations. So Provost Gonzalez and Rector Fernandez, I'm going to ask you to get out the memorandum of understanding that you have and go ahead and sign the last page and show it up here to the camera. MOU signings are a little bit different in pandemic times, but okay, we've got it signed there. There's no forgery. We're completely legitimate. So thank you both. I'm giving a round of applause, and I know applause is a little bit more awkward on Zoom, but everyone at home, I'm sure, is applauding loud and clear as well. And at this point, I'd like to give you each, as well as Provost Hernandez, who is here with us, a chance to talk a little bit about what signing this memorandum of understanding means for your institution. So Rector Fernandez, I'd like to start with you. Do you want to say a couple words of what this agreement means for the ITAM?
Yes, Mia, thank you very much. Dear Provost Nancy Gonzalez, it is my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to all faculty and staff members of Arizona State University that participate in this event. On behalf of ITAM's academic community, I want to express our enthusiasm for the Memorandum of Understanding between SAU and ITAM that we have just signed. The initiative comes at a relevant moment. The pandemic has posed great challenges for higher education, but also great opportunities. The possibilities for collaborative projects are greater than ever. The strength of institutions like ours have combined in imaginative ways. I am confident that the different areas of collaboration that are included in this MOU will yield important benefits for our universities in the future. I am particularly interested in the possibility of expanding our capabilities through joint academic programs both at the graduate and undergraduate levels, as well as increased faculty and exchange mobility. We welcome the opportunity to build again strong links with ASU. 2 decades ago, we created a partnership with the W.P. Carey School of Business to launch our executive MBA program. The strength and credibility of that initial collaboration gave a great boost to the program, which is still running and keeps attracting young leaders of the Mexican business community. Aware of the strategic importance of its southern neighbor, ASU has always put emphasis on maintaining good relationship with Mexican institutions and kept Mexican issues within its research program priorities. We congratulate you for the vision and stress our commitment to work together for the benefits of our communities. I look forward to the important developments that will come in the future. Thank you very much, and I praise this collaboration very much.
Thank you so much, Rector Fernandez, for those lovely words. Provost Hernandez, I want to give you a chance to say any words, anything you might like to add in terms of the significance of this MOU for the ITAM.
Thank you very much, Mia. It's my pleasure to say hello to Provost Gonzalez and to all the community of ASU. There's little to add after what our president, Rector Fernandez, has said, but I mean, our relationship with ASU goes years back. I remember hosting President Crow in Mexico City at the time many years ago. And, you know, for us, what can I say? I mean, our commitment to, scholarly research of the highest quality, as well as international collaboration, so it's always been present, and perhaps now more than ever. So the opportunity to work together with an institution of the quality of ASU, for which I have a profound admiration, is really fantastic for us. I'm sure that eventually all this is going to build upon the strength of our academic departments in political science, like tonight, but also law, economics, business, and many others. No? And not only will topics of relevance for both countries will appear as tonight's panel, but also, you know, the more fundamental research initiatives as well. So this is fantastic. I think the sky the limit. We know that now there can be as different types of hybrid models, as well as in-presence models of collaboration, and let's see how far we can go. But this is really fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Provost Hernandez, and I know that the admiration between the two institutions is mutual. Provost Gonzalez, is there anything you'd like to say on behalf of ASU?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, it's a privilege to be here with all of you today, President Fernandez Perez and Provost Hernandez, and everybody from ITAM who has been part of the long-time discussions and prior work that went into forming this new partnership. We enter into this partnership with deep respect and admiration, and a strong belief that by working together, we can achieve greater outcomes in terms of addressing shared global challenges as neighbors, as universities committed to the best of science and education and training the next generation. I think the potential for many educational opportunities, creative out-of-the-box thinking together will be tremendous. I know that there are many outstanding scholars already engaged in thinking about what those opportunities might be, and we're very enthusiastic about continuing this work. So I'm grateful. I'm here representing ASU in saying thank you for this partnership, and we look forward to the great things to come.
Thank you so much, Provost Gonzalez, and thank you to everyone, all of the leaders from our institutions who have made this possible and who have joined us here today. So now I'd like to transition into the meat of this event, which is an example of this expanded collaboration that we'll see between ASU and ITAM. So at this point, I'd like to ask Rector Fernandez, Provost Hernandez, and Provost Gonzalez to go ahead and turn off your cameras. And I'd like to ask our other 4 panelists today to turn on their cameras. And as they begin to do so, I want to set the stage a bit here for this conversation. And in doing so, I think it's important to acknowledge that we're having this conversation in a pivotal moment, right? The chapter that started 20 years ago on September 11th, 2001 is coming to a close with the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. And I think there's not a lot of certainty for many of us in terms of what comes next. Global threats seem less clear than they were in the past, particularly with the rise of powerful non-state actors and increasingly dangerous cyber attacks. And many of us may not be clear on who or what the enemy is or should be, and what, if anything, we can do about it. So today, our goal is to get some clarity on those questions through a regional lens. And to do so, we're very lucky to be joined by a panel of experts with really diverse areas of expertise. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce each of them. First, we have Dr. Vidal Romero. He is the interim director of ITAM's Political Science Department. He's also the co-director of the ITAM Center for the Study of Security, Intelligence, and Governance. He holds a doctorate in political science, and his research interests include the conditions under which governments are able to establish order, and also the conditions under which organized crime proliferates. He's a member of Mexico's National Researchers System, Level 2, and has collaborated on different research projects with the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the National Endowment for Democracy, Mexico Evalúa, and the Wilson Center, among others. Professor Jorge Tello Peon is the director of Madison Intelligence Mexico and the founder and co-director of the ITAM Center for the Study of Security, Intelligence, and Governance. He has extensive experience in developing, promoting, and implementing intelligence systems in the private and public sectors. He served as a national security advisor to Mexico's presidency, the Under Minister of Gobernación, and the director of the Centro de Investigación y Seguridad Nacional, as well as vice president of CEMEX's International Information Unit. At ITAM, he teaches a course on strategic intelligence systems. Dr. Nadia Bliss is the executive director of the Global Security Initiative at Arizona State University. Prior to leading GSI, she spent time as an assistant vice president of research strategy at ASU and a decade in various positions at the MIT Lincoln Laboratory. She holds a doctorate in applied mathematics for life and social sciences and is a professor of practice and graduate faculty in ASU School of Computing, Informatics, and Decision Systems Engineering. She's also a senior sustainability scientist in the Global Institute of Sustainability and Innovation and a senior fellow at New America. Finally, Lieutenant General Robert Schmidl is the University Advisor on Cyber Capabilities and Conflict Studies at Arizona State University. He holds a doctorate in philosophy and is a professor of practice in the School of Politics and Global Studies, as well as a senior fellow in the ASU Center on the Future of War, where he explores the effects of technology on human conflict. While on active duty, he served as the first deputy commander of the United States Cyber Command, the head of Marine Aviation, and the principal deputy director of cost assessment and program evaluation in the Office of the US Secretary of Defense. So as you can see here, we have a very accomplished panel with different experiences and perspectives that they're bringing to the table. And to kind of get a better sense of these experiences and perspectives that they are bringing to this conversation today, I want to do a round of rapid fire questions to dig into their experience a little bit more. So I have a question for each one of our panelists, and I'm going to ask you to try and have the discipline to answer the question in about a minute or so. Once the minute is up, you're going to start to hear the Oscar music coming on. You're going to feel a lot of pressure. Not really, but I will try and interrupt you as politely as possible, and we'll move on to the next question. Again, we want to have time to dig into as many topics as we can in today's discussion. So if I can, I'd like to start with you, Robert. You, as we heard, are ASU's University Advisor on Cyber Capabilities and Conflict Studies. That's a big title. Can you tell us what that title means? What do you do at ASU?
So one of the things I do at ASU is I teach in the School of Politics and Global Studies. I teach 2 graduate courses. One is an overview of cybersecurity, and the other is a course on the impact of emerging technologies on the development of strategy and plans. The area that I try to focus on, or that I focus on, is the sort of the nexus between technology and policy. And in my experiences, when we were standing up Cyber Command, and in my time up there, we seemed to fall into two different camps in the department. We either had technologists or we had policy wonks. And neither one of those two on their own is going to come to a coherent strategy or policy decision. So that's the area that I try to stay involved in. I'm on the advisory board of the National Security Agency, as well as on the Council on Foreign Relations. So I try to keep both sides of that working. And what I do at ASU is I advise on opportunities for us. I've been instrumental in placing some of the students in positions in government that have graduated from there with the NSA and other organizations. So I try to mentor them as much as I can, and to keep abreast of all of the stuff in the world of cyber specifically that's ongoing.
So you're not busy at all. I think this will be a good crash course for folks on your class. You're going to have lots of new signups for your class after this conversation. Nadia, I'd like to turn to you. As we heard, you're the executive director of the Global Security Initiative at ASU. What is the Global Security Initiative? What does it do?
Thanks, Mia. It's great to be here with everyone. I guess I personally am a technology wonk, as General Schmidl has said. So Global Security Initiative at ASU is a pan-university organization. So we sit at a level of a college and work across the entire university to bring the most advanced capabilities that ASU has to offer to bear on some of the most difficult challenges in national and global security. And we do that through research, we do that through education programs, and we do that through other programming. At the moment, we have four centers. We have a center on accelerating operational efficiency that works with Department of Homeland Security, a center on cybersecurity and trusted foundations, a center on human AI robot teaming, and a center on narrative disinformation and strategic influence. So it's just kind of like, what can we take at ASU and apply to really hard problems in national and global security?
Great, thanks so much, Nadia. I want to move to you, Jorge. As we heard, you spent more than 20 years working on security issues in the Mexican government. What would you say is the single biggest thing that you learned doing that work?
The single one? Well, I think that when you are related to security issues, you learn at the end that you have two ways to go. You have to go from bottom to the top, because security is everybody's issue, everybody's matter. Everybody knows something, and everybody has to say something because everybody is interested in that. And but also, it is true that you have to go from top to bottom to make sure that you have a comprehensive, general view of what you want to go, on where you want to go, and where you want to move all the forces you have on the ground. And but it is true, because in Mexico, for many, many years, we thought that everything was going to be solved by the president himself or the federal government. But then you have to rely on the state government, on the municipal governments, and on the citizens. And I think we learned in a very hard way to believe that that wasn't important. I think that's the most important point I learned.
The most important lessons tend to also be the hardest ones, as you mentioned. And Vidal, I'd like to wrap up with you here. As we heard, you are the co-director of ITAM, Center for the Study of Security, Intelligence, and Governance. I know you all have a lot of research, a lot of projects going on in that center. If you had to choose two or three of the most critical research areas that you're working on, what would you highlight?
Well, I think the main project that we have now is to create a comprehensive security model for Mexico. Believe it or not, but we don't have such a model yet. It's just like a Frankenstein of policies, actions, and ideas, and wishful thinking, some of which work and some of which doesn't work. So we're trying to systematize what we already have, because there are some good things, but looking forward to all, and it's not an easy task, because we have such a difficult times in Mexico in terms of domestic, but also in terms of global security. And so we're trying to give the big picture to all of this and not get lost into the day-to-day events.
Yeah, no, that's critical, and I'd like to hear kind of about all the different parts of that Frankenstein that you mentioned and how you're trying to sew it together. And I think this is a good point to transition into the larger discussion. Thank you all for humoring us with this quicker session of rapid fire questions. But as I mentioned in the introduction, we're having this conversation in a really pivotal moment, right? We have the closing of one chapter with the US withdrawal of Afghanistan. We're not sure what the next chapter is going to look like. We had Joe Biden just say, President Joe Biden, that we're transitioning from a period of endless war into a period of endless diplomacy. We're not sure exactly what that's going to look like. And so kind of given these choppy waters, this blurry scenario that we have in front of us, I'd like to ask each of you what are the three security threats, regional security threats, global security threats that keep you up at night, that you are most worried about when you're trying to go to sleep. Nadia, why don't we start with you, the three threats that most concern you on the global outlook?
Sure. So I'll start with, and again, I'd like to preface this with I'm clearly the geek on the panel, so I will defer the geopolitics to my distinguished co-panelists. I've spent the last 2 decades in national security research and development. I will start with, I think, in terms of the three big threats, the first one is one we're living through right now. I think the global pandemic has been a significant threat at national and global scale. And I think about it daily, particularly as I still have a unvaccinated child who is under 12 years old. So second, I think I would bring up, and I think this actually relates to the fact that it's been a pretty difficult pandemic to deal with, is essentially the integrity and pollution of our information ecosystem. I think one of the things that we're seeing is basically loss of trust in institutions and loss of trust in expertise. And this is something that's been developing, I would say, probably at least for the last 2 decades with emergence of social media and scale of computing technology. And I think there's a ton of incredibly positive benefits of those technologies, but we're in this very critical moment where we're seeing this fracture in the populace where people genuinely have difficult time understanding what to believe and what information to trust. And I think this deterioration of public trust in traditionally trusted institutions is incredibly, incredibly dangerous. The last thing that I'll mention is, and something again I track, particularly in my position in national security research and development, is if you look back to the 1960s, the US government, at least this is the US situation, accounted for, I think fractionally, for about twice as much R&D as it does right now as compared to industry. And right now we have significant reliance on industry R&D for a lot of our technologists that touch on all dimensions of security. And one of the challenges we see here is while industry innovation is incredibly important to the innovation ecosystem in general, the market incentives and market economics are such that often things are designed for ease of use and capabilities as opposed to with security in mind. And I would be happy to expand on those points later, but I'll leave it at that for the moment.
No, that's really helpful. And I do want to dig more into that last point that you mentioned in particular with research and development, investments in research and development. And so let's do that a little bit later. And I think your answer is also really indicative of just how many things security means, right?
Yes.
This huge umbrella term that means so many different things to different people. Vidal, I'd like to go to you here. When you think about the three largest threats that you think we're facing, particularly regionally, what are those three things on your list?
Well, if we think this in terms of north to south, I would say arms traffic. I think that's one of the main challenges that we have not addressed properly so far. If we think south to north, it's obviously, well, one of this is migration, right? And this is putting a lot of pressure into not only into the relationship between Mexico and the US, but also between Mexico and Central America. And this is, I don't think we are on the right path to find like a commonly acceptable solution for this issue. And the third one, and this is much broader, and I think we have to think more deeply about it. It is the implications of climate change. Nadia already talked about the pandemics, but there are many, I would say, unforeseen consequences that we have not properly thought so far. So I would think those are the three main challenges, and I don't think we are on the right path in neither of the three, unfortunately. So.
Yeah, that's discouraging, and I'd like to talk a little bit later about how we might be able to get on the right path. I think this emphasis on climate as a security issue is crucial. Robert, I'd like to turn to you here in terms of security issues that keep you up at night, and then also maybe you can give us a picture, if you have a brief definition or a way for us to conceptualize security. How might we think of the definition of security when it can mean so many different things to different people?
Okay, so we'll start there. So I think one of the things that is trending now that we have not fully grasped is in the world of security, the threats, if you will, that are out there are not just physically destructive. Okay, so we still are focused on competing, for example, with China and with Russia in terms of kinetic weapons, as the saying goes inside the Pentagon, which are things that cause physical destruction. And I think that what's happening, though, in the security ecosystem is that we are now seeing things that are in the virtual world or in the cyber world, and Nadia briefly alluded to that actually have the capability to have effects in the physical world that we've just not completely wrapped our heads around. We see it occasionally with things like ransomware shutting down small municipal cities, with power grids that are experiencing strange fluctuations, and those kinds of effects, while not something that is going to have the same effect as an atomic weapon, they do have an effect on our government and on the way that individuals perceive the credibility of the institutions. Okay, so I think if there's a big trend in the security world, that we have gone from, or that we are moving from, things that we focus on that are kinetic or physically destructive to things that are not visible, that we can't touch or feel, things like cyber, things like disinformation, and the sort of the corrosive effect that has on a society. The balkanization of the U.S. political systems these days is an example of that. And I think the challenge is that we, and I use the word we to describe both the Department of Defense and the Congress. The Congress is as, if not more, guilty than anyone in this regard, are focused on trying to build more of this kind of platform against China or against Russia. And I think that's the difficult thing for us to wean ourselves away from, that the future security threat is much more networked than it is individual platforms. And that the effect of that is what allows, for example, folks like a lot of the Russian hackers to have an influence that's way beyond what the investment is on the part of a government. Very low threshold of entry, and I don't think it's quite as extreme as some 20-year-old guy living in his parents' basement, but in some cases it's not real far off from that. So I think that is where we need to focus and to better understand sort of the cognitive space that the enemy is in, and again, to avoid the temptation to focus on the shiny object, which is trying to count up how many ships we have, how many ships they have, and to somehow come to an understanding. We think we come to an understanding about what parity means in that particular case. So those are the kinds of things. I mean, the point that Nadia made about the epidemic is clearly one that, I mean, if you just look in the open press at what is at Navy ships that were not effective because of the crews coming down with COVID. I mean, there's those kinds of things are out there, but we can't focus on that. We don't have enough brain space to focus on that if we're focused on building something that we think is going to be have a deterring effect, if you will, against the Chinese or the Russians. So that's where I would encourage, and what I do encourage when I talk to folks in the department, and I'm involved all the time, is to try to give them some space to look at those kinds of sort of orthogonal threats that I think are evolving.
Yeah, no, that's incredibly helpful, I think, and an important reminder, because it's much easier for us when there is a very visible, clear enemy, and it's much harder when the enemy isn't necessarily a shiny object and is so deeply interconnected in these ways that you describe. Jorge, I'd like to bring you in here. A lot of your background is on intelligence systems, and so I'm interested in your perspective in terms of maybe the three largest threats that you are worried about right now. Jorge, I don't think we can.
And I got it now.
There you go.
Of course, I agree with many things that they already say, my partners here, and I'd like to add something, because you ask at the beginning to Lieutenant General Schmidl, and I think it's right. We say talk a little bit about what we understand for security and what are we talking about. But it's too short time to say it, but at least we can say it. If we think of security as a stability or peace or feasibility, those words that describe this kind of order that we want. And if we do that, we can talk, of course, about threats, but also about our weakness. And I think that if I may mention, one of the most important weaknesses that brings other threats that could be dangerous to the regions are the asymmetry we have, and mainly talking about the Mexico and the United States. I think that's different when you come to think about Canada. But the asymmetry brings us some weakness that we have to be aware of that. But turning to the threats, I'd like to add two other things that I think would be very important, what already said by Vidal, talking about immigration. And of course, I want to say something before that. I agree with Nadia and Robert has said already, and I think that's the global threats. And I think the most important threats to the regions, and those that we have to be aware, are those that are global. And of course, the region will be submitted to that. But when you come to talk about the regional ones, we have to think about corruption, natural resources, and I'm thinking water mainly, and governance. And governance and the ability to rule. And I'm talking about something that perhaps we are experiencing down here in Mexico, but the lack of institutionality and weak institutions, I think that could be a very dangerous stuff. In all the border and also the border of the United States, and that's governance as well. I think I let those three for regional threats.
Yeah, thanks, Jorge. That's really helpful, and I want to go back because I think you've kind of given us a nice transition into the second part of this conversation, which I think exactly based on those threats and those weaknesses that you identified is looking toward preparedness. So what could we be doing better to be more prepared to face these threats? And you mentioned the asymmetry in the US-Mexico relationship. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you think, how you visualize this asymmetry. How does it manifest itself as a weakness? And what might we be able to do to kind of turn it around there and address that weakness?
I remember talking once to my counterpart in the head of the intelligence service in the United States, and said, "Do you know what is our most important secret we share?" And that's how little we talk, because I think the United States deal with big problems that you do have on the other side of the world. and the idea of solving small problems, perhaps in the southern border, and it's so intensive and so large. It's so important because we do need to work together. And I think that I can come later on. I think that's the way to go on. Sometimes I thought that asymmetry could be a weakness. It is a weakness if we don't realize it. But I also have to say something. When you have a big guy, a big fellow in the team, and a little one, a very little one, perhaps sometimes you can work together. The point is, if we want to add our differences and to make a strength out of them, and I think that would be the point to face many things. If we work together and we have a very huge communication and a coordination, then we can make a great difference. Listen, I just want to point out one case, the Ciudad Juárez, El Paso. You know that El Paso used to be, it's one of the most secure cities in the whole union. And next to El Paso, I mean, from the sky, it looks the same city. It looks to be the same city, but El Juárez used to be the most dangerous city in Mexico, and perhaps of the world. And it used to be the same city. I mean, and we understand that El Paso is like it is because El Juárez it is like it is. So if we put the whole thing together and think them as a whole, as one thing and one phenomenon, perhaps we can do much better for both sides. That's I think that's pretty much where I think we have to go.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the goal is to do better for both sides. And I think, Jorge, you're certainly getting into this area of the way that politics and policy making affect preparedness. And I'd like to bring Vidal in here. Vidal, you've done a lot of research in this space where democracy and security intersect. You've analyzed how perceptions of public security, for example, influence presidential approval. So kind of based on your research and in your perspective, what are the biggest challenges for doing and advancing this policy making to address these security threats? And how do politics influence national and regional security?
Yes, well, politics will always be present in public decision making, either domestic or international, but it is even more complex when decision makers at both sides of the border are taking decisions, because they are considering different constituencies when they are making their choices. So it means that there are multiple interests, there are different groups that they have to address, and they don't always want the same things. Actually, they in many occasions, they want opposite things. So how are you going to please these conflicting constituencies? And we see this in most of the pressing problems that we share in Mexico and the US. We see these issues. And for instance, take drugs consumption, drugs trafficking. On the one hand, most of the existing evidence will tell you, well, you have to legalize drugs, you have to create regulated markets, and that will help. That won't solve the problem, but that will help a lot. But it just so happens that presidents at both and congressmen at both sides of the border, they have specific voters that they don't want drugs to be legalized. And there are many reasons why they don't want it. So even when the policy option is kind of clear in terms of what to do, they don't do it because constituents don't want it. Or take, for instance, arms smuggling from the US to Mexico. The decision makers in the US, they are under significant pressure not to put more oversight on who's buying drugs, who's trading arms. But on the Mexican side, there is a strong pressure for putting much more controls on the border for arms so they don't get into Mexico. but politics is on the way again. And then if you add, here we're talking mainly about interest, material interest, which are kind of easier to address as opposed to cultural issues or nationalist sentiments. And when we get into those areas, things get really, really complicated for decision makers. But that doesn't mean we cannot get things done. Take, for instance, the Mexican NAFTA, for instance. By the time NAFTA was first heard in Mexico, if you look at the public opinion polls, around 80% of Mexicans were against trade agreement with the US. I'm talking about sometime in the early 90s. Then the government didn't quite listen to public opinion. They went ahead and they signed NAFTA. And just after a few months in which we were aware of all the benefits from NAFTA, especially regarding consumption, and you can see this in the supermarket, for instance, you will see a huge variety and lower prices on many goods. Public opinion just switched. It became 80% in favor of a trade agreement with the US. So sometimes decision makers, they have to take these chances and just bet on what's the right thing to do. Obviously, that's not an easy thing to do, but it's just an example regarding how things can be actually done.
Yeah, thank you, Vidal. That example is really helpful. And I think another key part of this discussion on preparedness is investment, right? Being prepared requires an investment. And I think for many of us, investment in security or defense can feel kind of siloed or separate from the way we live our day-to-day civilian lives. Although that is certainly not true, Nadia, as you've written and spoken a lot about, investments in research and development in the security area ripple out into innovation in the private sector as well. And so I'd like to hear a little bit about your perspective. You also direct this university initiative, which is dedicated to linking academia with government organizations like the Department of Defense, like the Department of Homeland Security. So how might we promote more cross-sector collaboration in this space? Why is doing so important? And what are some of the big roadblocks or challenges in promoting that sort of cross-sector collaboration?
Thanks, Mia. There's a lot in that question. So let me see. It
was a three-parter, but go ahead.
I may forget some parts of it, so please remind me if I haven't answered all the pieces. So I think there's a couple different components here, and I think there is this notion of collaborations between governments, industry, and academia. And then there are also sets of collaborations within various disciplines. So one of the things that I'd like to go back to just for a second is this something that General Schmidl said earlier, is this notion that there's a tendency to either have the technology wonks or the policy wonks and not bring them together. And I actually deeply agree with it. I think this is one of the big challenges, is we tend to be very disciplinary siloed, and the silos happen both in policy decisions and they happen in technology development. So if I kind of drop one level down into technology development or fielding of big systems, one of the observations that I'll make is, for a very long time, the US DoD research and development ecosystem was incredibly technology centric. We tended to think very much that we can technologize our way out of pretty much any problem. And again, as a computer scientist myself, I love technology and I understand that, and sometimes that is the answer. But I think one of the big things we actually missed as a national security community is things like the disinformation crisis, right? Because while propaganda is not new, the confluence of propaganda, techniques and narrative techniques with the scale of the computing infrastructure and this disproportionate environment where an individual is basically being fed information by algorithms, we just didn't approach it from the dimensions of multiple disciplines. So I think that's one of the things that has been a challenge, but is definitely being recognized. You know, one of the things that I see DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, is very much looking at interdisciplinary projects and bringing in people. So we have a project in GSI that brings people from the narrative expertise, from computer science expertise, from journalism expertise. I see other agencies do that as well. I think the other thing that's really interesting, particularly if we look from a perspective of academic research in context of national security mission space, the incentive structures within academia often do not incentivize solving a particular problem, but focus on advancing that particular faculty member in a discipline, right? So if you're a computer scientist, you're not really incentivized to work with a journalist or to work with a political scientist. And I think that's another thing where I'm excited about this partnership. And I'm really excited about seeing what I've seen at ASU for the last almost a decade, where ASU has formal organizational structures where we can work on these big challenges. And those organizational structures are required. So we have interdisciplinary structures where people are brought together on problems regardless of their discipline. And then one final thing I'll mention is I think there is this huge importance in the balance of that innovation ecosystem. For example, it's not just industry innovation that you need, and it's not just government innovation. And within government innovation, it's not just basic research, you also need applied research. So from perspective of US funding landscape, you need a National Science Foundation and you need a Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency because they complement each other and create this magical environment where we're able to produce things like internet and GPS and Siri and all those other technologies that people often think come from Silicon Valley, but actually were seeded by Department of Defense research many, many decades ago. So I'll kind of pause here and then would be happy to expand on any of that.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think, you know, it's crucial to kind of remind ourselves, again, the interconnection between the sectors and how investment in one area ripples out into positive effects in the other areas. And I did a big journalism no-no and gave you like a 3-part question and you answered all parts to a great and interesting detail. And I'd actually like to dig a little bit more into some of the underlying things that you're mentioning related to cybersecurity. And here I'd like to bring in Robert again. You were the first deputy commander of US Cyber Command, which started operations in 2010 and is tasked with defending Department of Defense information systems, supporting military cyberspace operations, and defending the US against cyber attacks. So certainly a lot has changed in this space, I would imagine, since 2010. But I'm interested in your perspective, Robert, in terms of whether we, the US, North America, are prepared in the face of these different cyber threats and what we might be able to do to get ourselves more prepared.
So the short answer is no. And the longer answer is as follows. So I just want to circle back to something Nadia said a minute ago, because I think it's really important to this whole discussion. When I was in OSD a couple of years ago, the figures we were using were 80% of the science and technology investment in the 60s was coming from the Department of Defense, 80% of the total investment. And that today it is more like 20 or 22%. So what does that mean? That means that most all of the innovation that's been happening over the course of the last 10 to 15 years has been happening in the commercial sector. And it's been happening in the commercial sector in unclassified regimes, where concerns about intellectual property and other things have been a higher concern than worrying about national security issues. Cyber is an excellent example of that, because a lot of the technology and the techniques that enable Cyber Command and other organizations like that to do the things they do are techniques that are in some cases rooted in commercial techniques and in commercial accesses. So there is a relationship there writ large between the national security establishment and the commercial sector in the United States, and we have intentionally kept those two separate. So in China, for example, they do not. So if a Chinese state hacker from the PLA gets into Boeing or into a subcontractor and extracts all manner of blueprints or information, it's handed over to the commercial sector in China to build it. So, I mean, this is all in the open press. So this is, we don't do that. We separate the two of them. And we just have to understand that when we do that, that there is a risk that we incur in terms of keeping up with technology. There's a very good reason why the National Security Agency and Cyber Command, but more so NSA, really reaches out to the commercial sector to understand what they're doing, et cetera, et cetera. You saw 6-8 months ago when NSA released to Microsoft a vulnerability in their system. They publicly released it. They had found in the Microsoft a new operating system. They'd never done that before. And they did that because they were trying to engender more of a combined effort, if you will, between the commercial sector and the national security sector. Now, that's also in many cases like trying to get cats and dogs to play together, because there's different kinds of people that go into work at Google or Microsoft or you name it, and they pride themselves on having a different outlook on life, a different lifestyle than people that decide to go into the national security arena, whether they're in uniform or civilians. So, you know, I think that trying to pick that apart is one of the big challenges we have. Back to your original question about cybersecurity, many of the electrical power grids, things like that, are not owned, controlled, or defended by the U.S. government. They're done by private companies. And so we're still working our way through exactly what that relationship ought to be. You see the new CISA, the security director, Jen Easterly, is another former NSA and Cybercommon person. I worked with her very closely years ago. And she is reaching out in a big way to the commercial sector to try to build those kinds of relationships. The last thing I would mention in terms of innovation, I do some work with the Defense Innovation Unit, trying to help them find pathways into the Department of Defense, because the innovation ecosystem in the national security arena has been so deeply rooted in Department of Defense investments, back to what we said, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when 80% of it was there, that now it's still not clear how a small startup company that has a big idea gets that into the department successfully and makes it until it becomes a program. And what I've seen coming out of some of those smaller startups that's really interesting is that they're not just concerned with the technology. They don't know any better, so they're doing exactly what they ought to be doing, which is trying to think about how to use that technology. So as an example, a company that is created a directed energy thing, right? And they are using it for one thing, and yet it has extraordinary applications. And they're already asking questions about that. It's completely unclassified right now. And so that's part of the challenge is how do you innovate to be able to not just come up with big ideas, but to get them into the system. And into the system at the Department of Defense, DARPA is an extraordinary organization, as are some of the others. But when it comes to buying things, they get into a very sort of Byzantine acquisition system in the Pentagon that makes it very difficult to push that through unless there is an impetus to do that. And that impetus has to be extraordinarily, it just has to be extraordinary. And even what Secretary Gates used to say was his big success was getting all these mine-resistant vehicles into the Department of Defense. The reason they weren't there before is because the services never thought they were going to fight a war like that. They never thought they were going to fight another counterinsurgency. They never imagined that they'd be driving up and down these roads in a country in the Middle East and having people put bombs under them. They wanted things that were light, that could maneuver. It didn't fit with their view of the future. And that's why I think the commercial innovation sector is so important to DoD, because they disrupt that vision. They cause seniors in the Pentagon to think twice about what they really think is going to happen going forward. So anyway, that's just a couple of comments on it.
No, I think that's an important reminder. I know we talk a lot in ASU about, you know, imagining different future situations, and to be the most prepared, you need everyone with as many different backgrounds and perspectives and experiences to be able to imagine these different situations that may feel unimaginable, certainly if you're working in a silo. And we have about 10 minutes left here of our conversation. Time has flown, and we've gotten a lot of great questions from the audience members. But I want to use this one. It's from a professor at ASU, and he says, "Thank you for all this great conversation. At ASU, we're so excited to be able to collaborate with ITAM, such a formidable school. My question is this for our Mexican partners. Do you worry about fading US global leadership? I feel like Trump's America First posture meant the US retrenched back into our shell, and now the Democrats are equally reluctant to be an active player in the world. They don't want to seem like the imperialist gringos preaching to others about rule of law and possible hypocrisy. It's a more apologetic America First posture than the arrogant one, but maybe the result the same. Is this something for Mexicans to welcome or lament?" So that's another multi-part question there, but I think the summary is, how do you perceive US global leadership, and what are the security effects? Do you think US global leadership in terms of our preparedness for security was affected by the Trump administration, and are we doing better now? Vidal, I wonder if you might want to weigh in on that question.
Sure, and thanks, Andres, for the question. We're also very excited to collaborate with ASU. I think it depends. I think it would depend if the American world leadership fades, and it depends on who's the other actor. I mean, if, for example, if we come back to the Cold War times, in terms of being the Soviet Union, the other relevant actor in the world politics, it wasn't so domestically, it wasn't such good news for Mexico, for Mexican people, because there was always the temptation for the Mexican government to flirt with the Soviet Union. And that means having some dubious friends like Cuba, Nicaragua, or all these other autocratic regimes in the region. So if we go into a new world scenario in which there is another powerful actor, and it is a democracy, let's say the UK or France or Germany, then that will be kind of welcome for Mexico, because it's always better to have a different option with whom to negotiate and do business and sign agreements and the like. But if the other powerful actor is an autocracy, that always leaves Mexico with the temptation to look south, but to look to the wrong people again, to Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and those are not the right friends for our country.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vidal. And I'm afraid we're coming up on time here, but before we leave, I want to kind of, in means of closing, we've talked a lot about some of the threats, the things that should concern us. We've talked about some of the things that we can do to maybe work toward a better future where those threats are less threatening. And I want to ask each of our panelists whether you are an optimist or a pessimist about the future of global security. So Nadia, why don't we start with you? Do you feel optimistic or pessimistic about these topics that we've discussed, and why?
Well, let's see, as a human, I am generally kind of pessimistic, but as a national security professional, I appreciate the challenge of working on difficult problems. So I sort of try to balance those. And quite frankly, you know, with pessimism, you don't get to do anything, right? You might as well throw up your hands and watch Netflix or something. So I guess what I will say is what I am particularly optimistic about, and I actually even heard this, even in this discussion, which has been fabulous, and I really appreciated being part of it, is recognition that certainly from a US perspective, but I think it would be from any national perspective, national security requires global security. The world is too interconnected for that not to be the case. And there is an increased recognition of, I guess, what I would call non-traditional threats. So I was really thrilled to hear Vidal mention climate change, because that's something that's very much a security threat. And quite frankly, the US Pentagon had brought it into all kinds of documents like Quadrennial Defense Review, all the way back to President Bush's administration. It is very much a security threat, and we're now thinking about it a lot more strategically. And other things that are complex and interconnected and borderless, like pandemic, cybersecurity, disinformation, cognitive security, trust in institutions. So from that perspective, I'm optimistic. I have no choice but to be optimistic, because I think these are incredibly important problems. I have a small child, and I want a secure future for her. I think the one thing that I will, if I can just mention, I'm a little bit pessimistic about is something that we talked about, we kind of touched on, but maybe not explicitly. So the one way that I think about security is we clearly understand what our vulnerabilities are. It's not absence of those vulnerabilities, but it's the fact that we see them. And I think sometimes what makes me a little bit nervous is that we don't quite appreciate where we're vulnerable. A good example of that is, incentive structures around technology, right? Technology is not built to be secure, it's built to be convenient. And if those incentive structures are not changing, that worries me, because again, we're all really interconnected, and one bad actor can do a lot of damage with rather insignificant resources. But I guess I will wrap up on optimistic overall.
Okay, that's good. A little bit of both, but we'll count you as an optimist. Jorge, what about you? Are you in the optimist camp or the pessimist camp in this area of regional security, and why?
And I am optimistic, and I like the way that you put it down, because we have no choice. And I think we are going to learn it. And I say that as a whole, as North America, in a good way or in a bad way, but we are going to come to a very clear conclusion, and it's that we are part of the same thing, that we are stick together, that we have to be aware, very much aware of our weakness, and we have a tremendous strengths, and of course the lead of the US, and we have to understand we are part of that. Like Vidal said, we have the temptations to look to other way. I think it's going to be very clear very soon that we are just in this place. So I think we have to make sure that we don't look at each other as an enemy, that we don't look at each other as a threat, that we do our part of the solution. And if we look at us as just as part of the problem, then we are going to go the wrong way. I mean, the wall or no wall in between the states of Mexico, that makes no sense. I mean, that is a political issue. We understand that, and that means nothing in terms of the regional security or the national security. The difference between the concept of security, if you just think about national security, the United States always thinks about national security from the border outside. And when you come to talk about national security in Mexico, you think about from the border inside. And then we have the risk that we don't find each other. We have to find each other and understand that we are in the same boat. Security, if I may say it in a metaphoric way, is not a place, it's a road. I mean, this is a process that we have to build every single day. And so we don't have a chance. That we don't have a choice, I'm sorry. We don't have a choice. We must be optimistic.
I like that. We're optimistic builders traveling on the road together. And Lieutenant General Schmidl, what would you say? What makes you optimistic? What makes you pessimistic? And where do you end up landing on the spectrum?
So I would say that I am probably a practical optimist, which means that I understand that we don't learn anything, and that we will continue to make the same mistakes over and over again, but that shouldn't keep us from not trying to not do that. In 1910, the best-selling book in Europe was called The End of War. And the book was all about the interconnections of the economies of Europe in 1910 that, according to the author, made a war in Europe absolutely untenable and unbelievable, and it would never happen. And 4 years later, we had the Battle of Somme, and millions of people died. So that we've been here before historically, where we thought that the interconnectedness was going to keep us from a war. But I think that the point that, to build on the point that Nadia mentioned a minute ago, maybe we are in a position where we think about how that interconnectedness also makes us vulnerable. It just isn't always about, you know, I mean, just look at the internet, right? So I think that's kind of the case. I think that I'm reminded of the myth of Sisyphus, you know, when he rolls the boulder up the hill every morning and it comes back down again. And that's kind of the way we got to approach this. We just keep at it. You just keep your head down and you just keep going at it. You try to make things better, but you never get to the point where you're just glazed over, thinking that this is going to be, you know, all kinds of goodness and light. Even when we look back on times when we thought they were better, they probably weren't. And, you know, when this country, the United States, I mean, it's difficult to imagine the fissure that existed in the early mid-70s over Vietnam. Yet the same people that were demonstrating in the streets against that war were the same folks that were in policy positions that made the decision to go into Iraq. So again, all we can do is just keep trying. It doesn't mean we shouldn't. And we can affect things sometimes through the technology. We can change the way that we behave. And I think that in some cases that offers us some of the best opportunities, because there's no mythology associated with it. It's here's the technology and so we need to think a lot more deeply about the kinds of technologies that we integrate into the national security system. In other words, do you want to make it easier or harder to launch an atomic weapon? I don't know, but those are the kinds of decisions that I think that kind of discussions that would be useful as we go forward. So at the end of the day, I have to be optimistic. I'm a glass half full kind of guy, but I like to think that I have a very practical and somewhat not cynical, skeptical outlook on the future. But
yeah. No, I think that's a theme here, and maybe we're going to always be rolling the boulder up the hill, but maybe with more technology, more discussions, we're rolling it a little bit better or a little bit faster. Vidal, to round us up here, optimist or pessimist, and why?
I'm sorry to close it like this, but I'm a pessimist.
Oh no.
Yeah, for two reasons. The first one is that, as Robert said, we keep on doing these huge and mistakes. And I just think just on a Brexit in the UK, think on people voting for what is obviously a bad choice for government. I don't know. I don't think we are really slow to learn, as Robert said. And the other is that historically, governments have been slower to adapt than how things change in reality. And I think we are in times of really fast change, and governments are really struggling to adapt to that. So that makes me kind of pessimistic. However, on the other side, just to close with a positive point here, I think we're also in times of in which we have taken a huge leap in terms of technology and how not producing knowledge, it has always happened, but on communicating and socializing that knowledge. That should have a positive impact on how we do policy and how governments take decisions.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate realistic pessimism and also realistic optimism, and Vidal is keeping us honest here. But we still have three optimists. So and one reluctant pessimist. So we didn't do so bad here. I want to thank all of you, our panelists. I want to thank everyone who has joined us today. I hope that you found this conversation as interesting and useful as I have. And we're going to continue these sorts of activities in collaboration with ASU and the ITAM. To stay up to date on those activities, you can follow both organizations on Twitter. That's at ASU_MX and at ITAM_MX. So until the next conversation, thank you all so much. Cuídense, and to many more collaborations between ASU and ITAM. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Looking forward to it.